Elara had always found comfort in the warm golden glow of the twin suns as they set over the lush green fields of Gaius 4. It was a colony world far removed from the busy hub of interstellar politics and warfare. Her days were spent exploring the rolling hills, helping her parents with chores, and dreaming of far-off places beyond the sky. But Gaius 4 was too peaceful to worry about what lay beyond. That peace shattered the day the sky turned red. It began like any other afternoon. Elara, barefoot and carefree, ran through the fields, her dark curls bouncing as she chased after her pet Shari, a small native creature with soft fur and long, delicate wings. Her father's voice boomed in the distance as he called her for dinner, a sound she usually greeted with mock reluctance. She had one last tumble in the tall grass before standing up, her hands dusted with soil. But then the sky darkened unnaturally. The warm breeze turned cold. Elara felt the change before she saw it, an electric hum in the air that sent a shiver down her spine. She squinted upward, trying to figure out what had blocked the sun. That's when she saw the first ship. It was enormous, black as night, and shaped like a massive, angular scarab. It hovered silently above the colony, casting an eerie shadow over the land. The crops swayed violently in a sudden gust of wind as more ships broke through the clouds, each one descending toward the surface like a predator ready to strike. Elara's heart raced. She had never seen anything like this before. There were no warnings, no sirens. The sky was filled with ships, their sleek, menacing shapes dwarfing the fields below. They moved with a terrifying grace, and from the largest of them, beams of bright light shot down to the ground. "Mom! Dad!" Elara screamed, her voice lost in the rising cacophony. Fear gripped her, her legs moving faster than she had ever thought possible as she ran toward her family's farmhouse. The once familiar fields felt endless, every step swallowed by the magnitude of what was happening above. The buzzing sound grew louder, alien, harsh, and close. By the time she reached the farmhouse, she saw her parents standing on the porch, their faces pale with terror as they watched the sky. Her mother grabbed her, pulling her close, her arms trembling. "We have to get inside," her father said, his voice strained with fear. "Now!" They barely made it through the door when a deafening crash shook the entire building. The walls trembled, and Elara clung to her mother as dust and debris fell from the ceiling. Her father ran to the window, peering out with wide, desperate eyes. "They're landing," he whispered. Through the window, Elara saw them, creatures unlike anything she had imagined. Insectoid and towering, with exoskeletons that shimmered in the dim light, the Zomkrol moved with an unsettling precision. They descended from their ships on segmented legs, their multifaceted eyes scanning the land as their mandibles clicked in a language that sounded like buzzing static. The Zomkrol were a name she had only heard in passing vague stories about an ancient, war-hungry species that raided colonies on the fringes of known space. But Gaius 4 was supposed to be far from danger, far from the reach of those who would wish them harm. Suddenly, the house's front door exploded inward, splintered wood flying in all directions. The Zomkrol entered the farmhouse, their insectoid forms bending unnaturally to fit through the doorframe. Elara screamed, but her mother held her tightly, whispering reassurances that sounded more like pleas to the stars. "Don't move," her father said, his voice low and trembling. He positioned himself between them and the invaders. "Please, we're just farmers. We have nothing of value." The Zomkrol did not respond in any way Elara could understand. One of them stepped forward, a massive figure with armor that shimmered green and black. It studied her father with cold detachment, its mandibles twitching as if considering his words. Then, without warning, it struck. The creature's claw-like appendage swung wide, hitting her father with a force that sent him crashing into the wall. He crumpled to the ground, unmoving. Her mother's scream echoed in Elara's ears, but the sound was distant, swallowed by her own terror. Everything moved too quickly after that. Her mother tried to fight back, but it was no use. The Zomkrol overwhelmed her, their limbs restraining her with practiced ease. And then they turned to Alara. She tried to run, but her feet felt heavy, the fear paralyzing her. A Zonkroll stepped toward her, raising one of its appendages. A small, spherical device shot out, hovering near her. Before she could react, it emitted a pulse of light that engulfed her. The world went dark. When Alara woke, she was no longer in her home. She wasn't even on Gaius 4. She was lying on a cold, metallic floor, her wrists bound in glowing restraints. The air smelled strange, sterile, and thick with an unnatural hum. Above her, the ceiling was impossibly high, its surface lined with alien technology she couldn't comprehend. Around her were other humans, all bound and dazed, each of them herded like cattle by the Zonkroll guards. Alara's throat tightened as she sat up, her head spinning. A sob escaped her lips as she scanned the crowd for any sign of her parents, but they were nowhere to be seen. Fear tightened around her chest, suffocating her. She was alone. The Zonkroll slavers moved with mechanical precision, communicating with one another in their sharp, clicking language. One of them, towering and clad in dark metallic armor, barked orders to the others. Alara watched in horror as the alien guards began sorting the captives into groups, dragging some toward different sections of the ship. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. She had heard whispers of slavers before, stories of alien species that took entire colonies for profit, but those were distant tales, warnings told to children. She had never thought it could happen to her family, to Gaius 4. Tears filled her eyes as a Zonkroll approached her. The alien's mandibles twitched, and without a word, it pulled her to her feet. Her legs wobbled beneath her, the weight of the restraints making every step feel heavy. She was shoved into a line of captives, all of them walking toward the ship's lower decks. "Move," the Zonkroll barked in its harsh, grating voice. Alara stumbled forward, her mind blank with shock. All around her, humans walked in silent terror, their faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. She didn't know where they were going or what would happen next. She only knew one thing for sure. Her life had been stolen. She was no longer a child on Gaius 4. She was a slave aboard an alien ship, hurtling toward an unknown fate. The Zonkroll slave ship, known as the Thresher, cruised through the cold void of space with the precision of a predator. Alara had lost count of the days since she had been taken. Time felt meaningless aboard the vessel, where there was no day, no night, just the endless hum of machinery and the harsh, metallic clank of the Zonkroll's movements. The other human captives, their faces gaunt and eyes hollow, worked in grim silence, just as she did, knowing that failure to comply with the Zonkroll's demands meant severe punishment. Alara's small hands had become calloused from the heavy lifting and menial labor. She spent her days moving cargo crates filled with supplies and strange alien technologies, her mind numb with exhaustion. At 11 years old, she should have been at home, playing with her pet Shari and laughing with her parents, but that life seemed like a distant dream now, one that would never come back. Her muscles ached, her body felt fragile, but the worst part was the constant, gnawing fear. She had heard stories whispered by the other slaves about what the Zonkroll did to those who slowed down or resisted. They would disappear, taken to places none dared talk about, and they were never seen again. Alara had already seen a few disappear, and she made sure to keep her head down, to follow orders, to survive. One evening, though it could have been morning or any other time, the routine was broken. The usual clamor of the ship was interrupted by a series of loud clicks and metallic shrieks that echoed through the corridors. The Zonkroll were gathered near the control room, their leader, V.A. Kresh, addressing the crew in their harsh, buzzing tongue. Alara didn't understand most of their speech, but from the tension in the air and the way the other captives whispered among themselves, she knew something was happening. That's when she heard the announcement: the Zonkroll were summoned to the Zalarian Council. The Zalarian Council was a governing body that ruled over vast stretches of the galaxy, made up of representatives from dozens of species. They were the ones who made laws, enforced peace, and dealt justice. The Zomkrol, known for their violent raids and disregard for those laws, were often under scrutiny, but they rarely faced real consequences. The Zomkrol didn't care for the council's rules, only profit. But this time, they would have to answer for their actions. Elara felt a flicker of hope when she overheard that the council had taken notice of the Zomkrol's illegal slave trade. Maybe they would be freed. Maybe the council would finally put a stop to this nightmare. But that fragile hope was shattered when V.A. Kresh's voice buzzed through the ship's intercom, making a chilling announcement. We have been summoned to the council for trial. One of you will take responsibility for this operation. Elara didn't understand what that meant at first. How could a slave be responsible for the actions of their captors? But then the reality hit her, hard and cold. The Zomkrol needed a scapegoat. Someone to blame. Someone to take the fall for their crimes. That someone was going to be her. The next day, 2 Zomkrol soldiers came to the slave quarters. Their claws clicked ominously as they searched the group, their multifaceted eyes scanning each face, looking for their chosen victim. When they reached Elara, one of them grabbed her arm and yanked her to her feet. She tried to pull away, but it was no use. They were far too strong, their limbs like iron bands around her small frame. "Let me go," she screamed, her voice hoarse from the effort. The other slaves looked away, unable to meet her gaze. There was no helping her now. The Zomkrol dragged her down the winding corridors of the ship, their metallic feet clanging against the floors as they took her to a dimly lit room. V.A. Kresh was waiting there, his enormous insectoid form looming over her like a living nightmare. His mandibles twitched as he regarded her with cold, calculating eyes. "This human," he began in his deep, buzzing voice, "is responsible for sabotaging the Zomkrol operations. She infiltrated our ranks and caused disruption to the trade of goods and resources. She will stand trial before the Zolarian Council, and she will be executed for her crimes." Elara stared up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. I didn't do anything. You took me. You enslaved us all. How can you say that?" V.A. Kresh leaned in closer, his mandibles clicking dangerously close to her face. "It does not matter. The council will believe what they are told. You are small, weak, insignificant. They do not care for your kind. They will not waste time on the truth." The room spun around her. She felt dizzy, sick, trapped. This couldn't be happening. How could they expect anyone to believe that she, a frightened child, had somehow sabotaged an entire alien ship? But the cold reality settled in as she stared into V.A. Kresh's unblinking eyes. It didn't matter. In the eyes of the Zomkrol, she was nothing more than a convenient excuse. Her heart sank as they fitted her with new restraints, binding her arms and legs tighter than ever before. The glowing cuffs around her wrists pulsed with a low hum, reminding her that escape was impossible. She was taken to a small, dark cell to await her trial, the walls closing in on her like the grasp of the Zomkrol themselves. Tears burned in her eyes, but she forced herself not to cry. She sat in the darkness, feeling utterly alone. The other slaves were gone now, scattered throughout the ship, likely oblivious to what was about to happen. And her family, her mother, her father were still out there, somewhere, if they were even still alive. The thought of them brought fresh tears to her eyes. She hugged her knees to her chest, rocking herself gently in the cold silence. No one was coming for her. No one would save her. The day of the trial came quickly. The Zomkrol ship entered the orbit of a massive space station that floated in the vacuum of space like a monolithic beacon of authority. This was Zolera Prime, the seat of the Zolarian Council, where disputes between galactic powers were settled. As the Zomkrol escorted Elara off the ship, her legs felt weak beneath her, barely able to hold her weight. The enormity of the station, with its towering spires and gleaming metallic surface, made her feel even smaller. They entered the Obelisk of Judgment, a grand chamber where the Council's trials were held. It was a vast, echoing space filled with floating platforms, holographic screens, and towering judges who sat upon elevated thrones made of shimmering alien metals. Their forms were diverse, some reptilian, others with multiple limbs, some with glowing eyes or translucent skin, but all of them radiated power and authority. Elara was brought before them, her small frame dwarfed by the scale of the room. She could feel the weight of their gaze as they looked down on her, indifferent and detached. Va Kresh stood on the opposite side, his posture calm, confident. He knew this trial was a mere formality. He had already won. The lead judge, a massive serpentine being with gleaming scales and piercing golden eyes, addressed the chamber. The accused is charged with sabotage, illegal interference with a sovereign species' operations, and threatening galactic peace. How does she plead? Elara opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. How could she defend herself? She didn't even understand the full extent of the accusations, much less how to counter them. She glanced at the towering council members, their expressions unreadable, and felt the weight of the Zomkrol's lies pressing down on her. I didn't do it, she stammered, her voice barely audible. I'm just a girl. They took me. I didn't sabotage anything. Her words echoed pitifully in the vast chamber, sounding weak and insignificant. Va Kresh stepped forward, his mandibles clicking as he spoke with practiced ease. This human was found aboard our vessel, interfering with our operations. She caused great damage to our systems, delaying our trade routes and endangering our crew. The evidence is clear. She is guilty. The council judges murmured among themselves, their glowing eyes flickering as they deliberated. Elara's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to tell them everything, but how could she? She was just a child, and they were the most powerful beings in the galaxy. What hope did she have? The lead judge raised a hand, and the room fell silent. We will review the evidence, he declared. The trial will resume tomorrow. As the Zonkrol led her back to her cell, Elara felt the last shreds of hope slipping away. The council wasn't going to listen to her. She was just one human girl, and the Zonkrol were a force too powerful to oppose. Her fate was sealed. In the darkness of her cell, Elara curled up on the cold floor, her mind filled with thoughts of her family, of home, and of the life she had lost. She could only wait for the inevitable judgment, her execution for a crime she never committed. And no one, she thought, would even remember her. The cold walls of Elara's cell seemed to close in on her as the reality of her situation sank deeper into her bones. Alone in the dark, she tried to summon any trace of hope, but there was nothing left. The trial would resume tomorrow, and she had no one to defend her. She was a scapegoat for the Zonkrol's crimes, a convenient pawn in a game she didn't understand. And when the council made their decision, she would be sentenced, executed for crimes she couldn't even comprehend. For hours, she huddled in the corner, her thin frame shaking with fear. Every now and then, she would hear the clanking of Zonkrol guards outside her cell, their metallic limbs scraping the floors as they moved with cold precision. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of the alien machinery that powered the station. Time felt stretched and warped, each moment of waiting adding to the weight of dread that hung over her. Then, suddenly, the faint glow of her cell door changed. The previously opaque surface became translucent, and she saw a shadowy figure approaching. Elara's heart pounded. Was it the Zonkrol coming to take her to her final trial? But the figure was different, tall and shrouded in a dark cloak. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a man unlike any of the aliens she had encountered on Zalera Prime. He was human. Elara's breath caught in her throat as the man stepped inside. His presence was commanding, yet there was a warmth in his eyes that contrasted with the cold indifference of the Zonkrol. He had dark hair peppered with gray, and his face, though lined with age and experience, bore an intensity that seemed almost unshakable. His black cloak flowed behind him as he knelt in front of Elara, his gaze softening when he saw how terrified she was. "You're human," Elara whispered, hardly daring to believe her eyes. The man gave a small nod, his lips forming a slight smile. "My name is Dr. Magnus Riker," he said, his voice calm but filled with quiet strength. "And I'm here to help you." Elara stared at him, confusion swirling in her mind. "But why? I don't even know you." "You don't have to," Riker replied, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know what's been done to you, Elara. The Zonkroll are using you as a scapegoat, and the Council is about to let it happen. But I'm not going to let them." Hope flickered in Elara's chest, but she was afraid to trust it. After everything she had been through, how could this stranger possibly save her? "The Council doesn't care," she whispered, her voice shaky. "They won't listen to me. They already think I'm guilty." Riker's expression hardened. "They will listen, because I have evidence that will make them. The Zonkroll think they can lie their way out of this, but I've been tracking their operations for a long time. I know the truth, and I can prove it." Elara blinked, trying to process what he was saying. "But why would you help me? You don't even know me. You don't have to do this." Riker's eyes softened again, a hint of sadness flickering behind his steely resolve. "I help when I can. The galaxy has too many who are willing to look the other way when injustice happens. I can't. Not anymore." He paused, then added, "You remind me of someone I lost a long time ago. I couldn't save her. But I can save you." Before Elara could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Riker stood up, his expression tightening. "We don't have much time," he said, turning toward the door. "The trial will resume soon. When we get to the council chamber, follow my lead. I'll take care of the rest." He turned to leave, but before he could step out, Elara called after him. "Dr. Riker," she asked, her voice trembling. "Thank you." Riker glanced over his shoulder, giving her a nod that was both reassuring and resolute. "You're stronger than you know, Elara. Don't give up." With that, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Elara alone once more. But this time, something had changed. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. For the first time since her capture, she felt a glimmer of hope, fragile, but real. The obelisk of judgment was even more intimidating the second time Elara entered it. The vast chamber echoed with the murmurs of the council and the delegates from various species, their holographic screens flickering with data and records. The towering council members, seated on their gleaming pedestals, watched with silent, unblinking eyes as Elara was brought forward by the Zonkroll guards. V.A. Kresh was already in the center of the chamber, standing tall and confident, his mandibles clicking softly in satisfaction. He knew the trial was just a formality. The evidence against Elara had been fabricated, and the council wouldn't waste time digging any deeper. But as Elara was pushed forward, a familiar figure stepped into the chamber, drawing the attention of everyone present. Dr. Magnus Riker, his cloak billowing behind him, approached the council with an air of authority that seemed to shift the entire dynamic of the room. He moved with purpose, his gaze locked onto the lead judge as he strode into the center of the chamber. "Who are you?" demanded the lead judge, his serpentine form coiling slightly as he regarded Riker with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "I am Dr. Magnus Riker," he replied, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Former Earth diplomat and current independent investigator. I have come to speak on behalf of this child, who stands wrongly accused." V.A. Kresh's mandibles twitched in irritation. "This is an illegal interference," he hissed. "The trial is already in progress. This human has no authority here." Riker turned to V.A. Kresh, his expression hardening. "No authority? I have more authority here than you'd like to admit, V.A. Kresh. The Zonkroll have been violating council laws for years, and I have the evidence to prove it. This trial is a sham, and you know it." Gasps and murmurs spread through the chamber as Riker reached into his cloak, pulling out a small holodisc. He held it up for the council to see. This disc contains recordings of the Zomkrol's illegal slave trade, including their abduction of the humans from Gaius 4. It shows their brutal treatment of captives and their plan to use this child as a scapegoat to avoid punishment. The council deserves the truth, and I'm here to provide it. With a flick of his wrist, Riker inserted the holodisc into the chamber's projection system. Immediately, the room was filled with images grainy but clear of the Zomkrol ships descending on Gaius 4, capturing humans, and transporting them in cruel conditions. The council watched in silence as the horrors of the Zomkrol's operations were laid bare before them. V.A. Kresh's posture stiffened, his mandibles clicking furiously. This is fabricated. This human is a rogue. He's falsifying evidence to protect his own kind. Riker's gaze never wavered. These recordings are taken from your own ship's database. They're encrypted with Zomkrol codes, which the Council's analysts can verify. He turned back to the Council, his voice steady and firm. This trial was never about justice. It was about covering up the Zomkrol's crimes. This girl is innocent, and it's time the Council held the Zomkrol accountable for their actions. The room fell into a tense silence as the Council deliberated. Elara's heart raced in her chest as she stood beside Riker, watching the judge's glowing eyes flicker with data and calculations. Minutes felt like hours, the weight of her fate hanging in the balance. Finally, the lead judge spoke, his deep voice reverberating through the chamber. The evidence is clear. The accused, Elara of Gaius 4, is innocent of all charges. The Zomkrol will be held accountable for their violations of council law and their illegal slave trade. The punishment will be severe. V.A. Kresh screeched in fury, but the council's guards quickly surrounded him and the other Zomkrol, restraining them before they could protest further. The insectoid leader glared at Riker with venomous eyes, but his defiance was meaningless now. The council's judgment was final. As the Zomkrol were led away, Riker turned to Elara, a faint smile on his face. "It's over," he said softly. "You're free." Elara's eyes filled with tears of relief, of disbelief, of gratitude. She had been saved, against all odds, by this mysterious man who had appeared in her darkest moment. She had survived. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Riker knelt down beside her, his eyes filled with kindness. "You were brave, Elara. Braver than most. And now you get to live the life that was taken from you." But as they left the chamber together, Riker's eyes betrayed a lingering sadness, a weight that he carried with him. Elara knew, even in her young heart, that Riker had lost someone important to him. And though he had saved her, that pain still haunted him. The galaxy outside the station was vast and dangerous, but Elara was no longer afraid. She was free, and with Riker by her side, she knew that whatever awaited her next, she would face it with courage. For the first time in a long time, Elara had hope. The obelisk of judgment was now silent, save for the soft hum of holographic screens that flickered with data. Elara stood beside Dr. Magnus Riker, her heart still racing from the dramatic turn of events that had just unfolded. She had been saved at least for the moment. The Zomkrol, whose cruelty had brought her to this place, were being restrained by the Council's enforcers. V.A. Kresh, their leader, stood rigid, his mandibles twitching in fury as his soldiers were led away in chains. The sight should have filled Elara with a sense of victory, but instead, she felt a strange, lingering unease. The lead judge, his serpentine body coiled high above the rest of the council, spoke again, his voice deep and resonant. "The Zomkrol have violated council laws regarding the treatment of sentient beings. For their crimes, they will be stripped of their trade licenses, their assets seized, and their leadership imprisoned. This council does not tolerate such atrocities." The words echoed through the chamber, met with solemn nods from the other judges. The room buzzed with tension as the council finalized their ruling. For Elara, it felt like the closing of one chapter and the start of something she couldn't quite understand. As the verdict was carried out, V.A. Kresh turned his multifaceted eyes on Riker. Though bound by energy restraints, his towering presence still seemed menacing. "This isn't over, human," he hissed, his mandibles snapping in anger. "You may have won this battle, but the Zonkrol will not forget. We never forget." Riker didn't flinch. His expression remained calm, unbothered by the aliens' threats. "Perhaps it's time you learned that the galaxy doesn't belong to you, V.A. Kresh. The Council has spoken." V.A. Kresh let out a low, buzzing growl, but the guards quickly silenced him, dragging him and the remaining Zonkrol out of the chamber. As they disappeared, the weight of their presence finally lifted, and Alara felt as if she could breathe for the first time since she had been taken. Her body relaxed slightly, the tension in her small frame loosening, but the fear and exhaustion still clung to her like a shadow. Riker knelt beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "It's done, Alara. You're free now." Free. The word felt almost foreign to her after everything she had endured. The idea of going back to a normal life seemed impossible, like something that had happened to another person in a different time. She had been enslaved, accused of crimes she didn't commit, and faced the prospect of execution. Now, here she was, standing among the most powerful beings in the galaxy, alive and free. But what came next? "Where will I go?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "My parents. I don't even know if they're still alive. And even if they are, I don't know where they are." Riker's expression grew serious, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "We'll find them," he promised. "The Council can help. They have records of the Zonkrol's raids, and we can track down the other captives. You're not alone in this." The thought of finding her parents gave her hope, but there was still a nagging doubt in the back of her mind. What if they were gone? What if she was truly alone? The fear of that reality gnawed at her, but Riker's presence was comforting. He had saved her when no one else could, and that gave her the strength to believe, even if only a little. The Council's lead judge spoke again, this time directing his gaze toward Riker. "Dr. Riker, we commend you for your bravery and the evidence you have provided. The Zonkrol's crimes will not go unpunished. However, we must ask what will become of the child." Alara looked up at Riker, her heart skipping a beat. What would become of her? She didn't want to go back to being just another lost soul in the galaxy, adrift with no one to care for her. She had lost so much already: her home, her family, her innocence. She wasn't ready to face the universe alone. Riker stood tall, his voice steady as he addressed the Council. "Alara will be under my protection. Until her family is found, I will ensure her safety and well-being." The Council members exchanged glances, their glowing eyes flickering in unison. The lead judge gave a slow nod. "Very well. We trust you will see to it that she is cared for. The Council has no further business in this matter." With that, the trial officially ended, and the chamber's lights dimmed as the judges retreated to their respective platforms. The tension that had gripped the room finally dissipated, leaving behind an eerie calm. Riker gently guided Alara toward the exit, his arm around her shoulders in a protective gesture. As they walked, Alara's mind raced. What now? Where would they go? How could she ever go back to being a normal child after everything she had been through? Once they were outside the Obelisk of Judgment, Riker led her toward a docking bay where his ship, a sleek, silver vessel, was waiting. The ship's hull glistened in the station's artificial light, and its design was unlike any of the Zonkrol's brutalist, insect-like ships. It looked more like something from a dream, a small, agile craft built for speed and exploration. "Is this yours?" Alara asked, her voice tinged with awe. Riker smiled faintly. "It's called the Horizon. It's been my home for the last few years. And now, it's yours too, if you want." Alara hesitated, looking up at him. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," Riker said firmly. You're just a kid who's been through something no one should ever have to go through. I want to help. And besides, I could use the company." For a moment, Alara didn't know what to say. She felt overwhelmed, but not in the same way she had felt when she was a prisoner. This was different. This was the possibility of a future, a life where she wasn't a slave, where she wasn't alone. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll come with you." Riker smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "Good. We'll figure it out together." They boarded the Horizon, and as the ship's engines hummed to life, Alara found herself gazing out of the viewport at the vastness of space beyond. Stars twinkled in the distance, and nebulas painted the blackness with swirls of color. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Alara wasn't afraid. As the ship lifted off from the docking bay and soared into the stars, Alara sat beside Riker in the cockpit, watching as the galaxy unfolded before her. The weight of her past still clung to her, but it felt lighter now, like a burden she no longer had to carry alone. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice quiet but curious. Riker glanced at her with a smile. "Wherever we need to go. The galaxy's a big place. But I think our first stop will be finding your parents. After that, well, we'll see." Alara nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. The stars stretched out endlessly before them, filled with unknown dangers and possibilities. But she wasn't alone anymore. With Riker at her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, she knew that she had a future, one that was hers to shape. As the Horizon accelerated into the depths of space, leaving Zalera Prime behind, Alara looked ahead with new eyes. She had survived the impossible. Now, she was free. And she would never let anyone take that freedom from her again.